I think that we are looking at a super important cultural phenomenon here. The industry itself favored this kind of imitation in a wide variety of infrastructural ways that I won't go into here. So I think that there is a reason beyond merely imitation as such, and vastly beyond and away from anything you can imagine as, well, the best thing, becomes more common, right? In, which was taken as holy writ during the 90s as an ideology, which is nonsense. So therefore, um, I, in that Patreon dialogue, described these role-playing texts as the reverse mullet, meaning party in the front, business in the back. There you are. You open up the role-playing text and you are ready to party, and then thud. Not just your experience of reading it, but you recognize that that is play. They got you at the table and you're ready to go. And I I guess that's what we're doing here today. And I have seen this in the habits of people playing many, many times. Many a time when I was going to Gen Con regularly and meeting all these, names of all these books that you have on your shelf and playing games with them and discovering that this is what they do. And I had come to saying, "Oh, I'm really excited about your game. Let's, sure, I'd love to play. If you've got the time, this is going to be great." And I make up a character, or they hand me a character and I'm ready to go. And then in the middle of the second scene of play, I'm suddenly realizing, so that's what we're doing. Well, I guess I'll just wait till Bobby G shows up. However, that still hasn't addressed Aldo's question, which I shall repeat. We're asking about whether the author's approach to game mastering is intrinsic to the system. So, this is a great question. It's game by game, or text by text, I should say. Pick up a text and it's the reverse mullet. And then the question is, well, do I have to? In the sense that, how much rewrite of procedure do I have to do in order so that this nonsense isn't, baked into play? And in many games, and this is, I think, a relief, in many games, it's a Sharpie. You say, well, that's just a bunch of, nameless organic, exudate or, refuse that has been spattered onto this otherwise perfectly reasonable party. And all we have to do is just clean it off, right? So again, take out your Sharpie and, as long as you just sort of mentally, redact that crap, then you look what the game has there and it's fine. And in fact, how to game master it is very straightforward, because we do have these situations and we do have these characters, and your characters are just characters in the situation too. There may be various specific techniques that you may have to come up with, but that's fine. So there you are, and you can just play. Legendary Lives is an excellent example. The sections on game mastering are not only aiming at this kind of control, but they're also kind of blithery and contradict each other, like the author's kind of arguing with themselves. And a lot of these games are like that too. So you realize that they thought they were supposed to write a game mastering section, and they knew what a good game mastering section was supposed to say, and they wrote it in there. And again, as something of I can be sympathetic toward, is that some part of them knew they were spouting nonsense, and so they kept saying "except," and then going back and saying what they said in the first place against the "except," and so you end up kind of with this two-headed troll arguing with itself situation. But even if you don't have that, even if it is pretty much just, lifted and said, okay, here, railroad everything, they'll be fine. That's the way to do it. And you look at that and you go, pfft, and you cross out that paragraph, and there's nothing in the book that's changed. No procedure has changed by doing that. So a lot of them are like that. And that's a relief to all of us, because we can still enjoy the game. I'm going to give credit to the authors. We're probably playing the game that they played when we do that, and that's excellent. So then we have the games in which that way of play was the way they played, and therefore the systemic elements that are actually on there are poor. They don't work. They are poor design in a wide variety of possible ways. And a good example is Hong Kong Action Theater, in which we, played a fair amount of, and we're just like, oh man, this thing's all over the place, and we're really not, we're not getting what we came for. We're not, we're putting our hearts into this, and these concepts are just not flying. And I actually met the author and, politely asked, about how, for example, did you use that magic system and so forth? No. He said, oh, I don't use anything in there. And I found that out from people who worked on Werewolf. And I said, well, what's this like? And they say, oh, we don't do that. We just play GURPS. We just play that stuff with GURPS. I'm like, really? I got a lot of that kind of response. I met a lot of people who said exactly that about their own fucking published games. And out of shock, I realized that I was not talking to practitioners. They're not game designers because they're not players. Wow. Okay. I said, time to start thinking differently about this whole getting into game publishing thing. So, in this circumstance, there may be aspects of the game, or it's just the way the topic was presented to you in the glowing prose in the the front of the mullet, that the front of the reverse mullet, that you still want to do it. Well, you're going to have to do more than just redact a few bits of nonsense. You're going to have to be a game designer. You're going to have to say, well, we're taking, this poor mutilated, non-functional thing that we found lying here in the road, and we're going to have to work with this. And it is possible, and I have done it a lot. There's plenty of times when I have said, this, we're just going to have to do this part differently. Now, I think that I have been reasonably honest as much as I can, or can hope to have been, in giving it a good shot first. Because as I frequently say, sometimes you read text and you say, oh, this can't possibly work. This is poor. And then you try it, and then you learn something. You are a little surprised. At this, we're doing it this way. How come more games don't do it this way? So I don't really recommend, overriding a game's textual procedures until you've given it a fair shake. But there's a lot of them which are terrible, and particularly in this particular school. You're reading the reverse mullet, and then you are reading further into the procedures, and you get a little dubious about them, and you do give them the fair shake, and you're like, okay, these guys are just like those other folks I talked to. They filled some space with this stuff. One of the authors was told to put in the system stuff and make it not look the same as, the more well-known systems, and they blither up something, and there you go. They may well have done it in good faith. There are a lot of people who think that they can just sort of dream up a dice resolution and ordering system, or some sort of resource-based aspect of play, and that they can just write it down and it's done. And I don't think they can. But if they don't know they can't, then they'll do that. So they might not even have been like deliberately lazy or deceptive. They might have gone through it with a very, very, very fine legal pen in terms of all the ifs and ands and buts and stuff. But it wasn't about play. And it shows. So listing the titles is ridiculous. It would take, it would be far more efficient to list the titles that aren't from that period. And as we know, that period technically really isn't over. There was a huge cultural commitment to what role-playing texts had in them at that time. And there's no getting it out of someone's head. Even if you sit down with them and they don't play that way, they think that's what the book is supposed to say. Okay, so those are, two notions there about what you may encounter in terms of actual system. So Aldo continues because he recognized that this distinction between play and not play is well worth considering, that it's not just me slamming things I don't like. I am literally talking about the presence of a medium or its absence. And he goes on to ask, he says, I wonder if there is a difference between a game that lays out wonderful instruments and doesn't know how to use them, and a game that lacks any genuine instrumentation at all. And I say yes. So the first one would be what I've already talked about, where you have perfectly working system and then just some textual blither, and system that could be pretty good if somebody would actually freaking play it and continue to work on it. It would be fine, as well as removing the blither. So that's kind of the first step, where the instrumentation of play is just not being expressed, and the text as such is, not very bright, one might say, in regard to that aspect of play. So then you have other things which are ass. They're not working devices. They're not working, that's the wrong word. They are not working instrumentation for the operation of the medium. They just aren't. And therefore, what do you do with this? It says here, do you think, okay, right, do you think that a game is, okay, he asks about those first games, that those are salvageable. And he says, what about salvaging this other thing? And what I said is that, you can't. There's nothing there. You have to look at maybe the pretty picture on the cover of the book and say, well, we want to do that. And then you just start from scratch and say, how do we do that? You take maybe mine the thing for disconnected things. So you're not even really looking at system, just mine various disconnected procedures, which seem very strong to you. A good example for that for me is capes, which I consider, basically unplayable, blither. There's no system there at all. There's no medium of play at all. But the exact way that the author set up the options for character creation, such that you do take column A, column B, and then you do a little thing with it, it's glorious. So I might look at that and say, hey, see that? Cool. We're going to do that, and then we're going to play Champions now, or something like that. Or there's some, nifty list of stuff, and you like that list. And you say, cool, I'm going to play, that alchemy list, that rocks. I'm just going to lift up that alchemy list, and I'm going over here, and I'm going to play Tunnels and Trolls or something like that. Do you think that bad GMing sections invariably reveal fundamentally problematic assumptions about play that usually hobble entire designs? And the answer is no. First of all, those bad GMing sections are often rather isolated. And that I think most games are either playable without them as is, or are salvageable through some, pleasant, sympathetic, usage of most of what's there. Or the alternative, sadly, is that the whole thing is basically, a waste of any technology or cognitive effort that went into it, except for maybe one or two little things which you might as well just sort of put into your usage box for doing something, that is actually play. So the presence of the bad GMing section isn't really, a reason to junk a game. Typically, the whole thing is far more obviously borked as a unit to get to the point where I'm being so dismissive of it. Let's see here. Yes. My answer to that was no, I don't think that. I don't think that seeing the bad GMing section is basically, okay, this is trash, get rid of that for the whole thing. No, I don't think that. Most of these sections are merely imitated from what they thought was supposed to be in there. And the actual lineage, the textual lineage of where they got it, I think that's really easy to trace, actually. I mean, the phrases get repeated, or, ifs and buts, all sorts of things, are very easily traced as write it like that. Um, and so most of the games, out there that where you encounter the reverse mullet, I think are still there for us. So that's my reply. Anyway, this was fun. Thank you to all the patrons. Thank you for all of the support making this here possible, and looking forward to whatever questions may be flying at me for the next time.